Hi, Captain Peter Cutsey again. This is the uh, fourth video in the series of HUD presentations. So we'll brief today on the A3 approach mode. The HGS A3 mode is specifically designed for manual ILS approach and landing operations at three minimums. In the A3 mode, the guidance Q gives flight path guidance derived from the HGS internal approach and landing guidance algorithms. In the A3 mode, the HGS removes the altitude and airspeed tape displays, the altitude and airspeed tapes, as in the IMC mode, and replaces them with numeric representations, as we see here: 1,800 feet baro altitude, 600 feet per minute vertical speed, and the CAS, IAS virtually the same, 135 knots, and the commanded speed at 130 knots. And as we mentioned in other modes, the A3 mode is enunciated here when it has been selected and is being used. The thing I teach, and I found myself in using the HUD, is that symbology is all green, and it will take a little while to get used to the green presentation. These messages or advisories don't appear to be that visible because they're all the same color. Whereas with the PFD, you have a color presentation on the PFD. In any case, you'll get used to it. For the sake of make things a little easier, I've colored in the guidance cue in red. It isn't red, it's green, and it's a green hollow circle. The flight path symbol, the guidance cue, and here is the speed error tape. I want to talk briefly about that. Excuse me. It will let you know whether you are above or below your commanded speed. Here is your commanded speed of 130 knots in this example, and your actual speed is 135 knots indicated, or calibrated, but indicated. What this bar or tape is indicating is you have a difference between the commanded and the actual. In this case, the difference of the actual is greater than commanded, so the speed error tape is indicating an error of 5 knots above the left wingtip. That's where it's situated. If your actual speed and your commanded speed were identical, you would have no error tape. Conversely, if your commanded speed was 130 knots and your actual speed was 125 knots, this pillar would be reversed and would be pointed downwards, same scale. So that scale is approximately 5 knots. That would be 10 knots, and that would be 15 knots. Likewise here, 5 knots, 10 knots, and maybe 15 knots. Think of it also as a speed differential tape, meaning that if you're at 160 knots and you set your bug on the MCP to 210 knots to clean up after takeoff, you now have a difference of several knots between the commanded of 210 and the actual of 160. So in fact, this pillar will be below the wingtip, indicating that there is a difference between the selected and the actual. Don't think of it as an error, because it's not an error in this case. You're accelerating, so your brain has to accept the fact that that's what you're going to see. So think of it in two different ways. When you're accelerating and decelerating and you make a change on the MCP, then you can expect the change to be reflected here. Conversely, if you were decelerating from 250 knots to flaps up speed of, let's say, 205 knots, you would have the same. That pillar would be indicating that you have a difference of perhaps 50 or 60 knots, and your actual speed was on the high side. So if it's on the high side, your actual speed, and the speed that you want is lower, then you would have a discrepancy here, indicating that you have an error, that your actual speed is not the same. So remember, when the speeds are the same, speed error tape won't be there. It won't exist. So this is 5 knots difference from the selected. And if it was the other way around, if that was 125, lower speed, actual speed would be here below. So that's something we want to make sure we understand. Now let's go and have a look at the A3 flare command. We're going to see it in the video. Flare command, which is this cross, will come into view at 105 feet above the runway elevation. It's all in green, of course. It'll flash initially, then go solid, and, excuse me, and then move gradually up to enter the guidance queue. So flare command enters the guidance queue. You, as pilot flying, have to pitch up slightly and enough to keep the command queue, or command, inside the guidance queue, inside the flight path vector. Okay, so that's very, very important that you know that. So it's called the flare command. This is the flare command, this is the guidance queue, and this is the aircraft symbol. And we'll see that in the video. So without any further ado, let's go to the video. And have a look. Excuse me. So wind is from the left at 10 knots. Therefore, the flight path symbol and guidance Q and accelerate, decelerate caret are on to the right of the center. So we're running the video now at 930 feet above runway elevation, 1,860 feet barrel, descending at 850 feet per minute, and the angle of attack is 5.4 degrees. There's your bore sight, your aircraft symbol, approximately 2 degrees of pitch up above the horizon. There's your horizon bar, and there's your slip skid indicator. And this is the roll scale and the roll pointer. There's your 5 degrees of pitch, so that we're at about 2 degrees of pitch. There's the A3 mode as we discussed before. It's enunciated, meaning that we're using it. This is our actual speed of 154 knots. This is the commanded speed on the MCP. Because both are the same, we do not have a speed error tape. 300 feet, the runway edge alignment lines come into view. And as you notice, when we go through 100 feet, there is the command, flare command. It's in the guidance queue. And now you're pitching up manually to keep the guidance queue and the flare command within the flight path symbol, which will allow you to touch down. There's the runway lights, there's the center line of the runway, and there is the center line of the runway, which is generated from the localizer. And you're on the ground and coming back to the center of the runway. There's the actual ground speed. So there you are on the center line, looking good. So virtually, if you were in a smoke-filled flight deck, you could touch down using this technology without having to see anything until you stopped, if you needed to. The RVR here is 600 feet RVR in this particular case. So there you go. There you have it. That is the A3 mode. And if you notice how clean, neat and clean it is, very similar to the IMC mode. That happens to be the localizer, and that is the glide slope. All right. If you need to contact me or want to contact me for a briefing with your partner, we'll do it free. Contact me on with my email or my telephone. Happy flying.